We got married yesterday. Those four words landed in my chest like a dropped plate, sharp, sudden, and impossible to ignore. I remember the way my hand tightened around my phone, how my thumb went numb as if the blood had drained out of it. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. Or maybe she'd misspoken. People do that sometimes when they're nervous. They jumble days. They say yesterday when they mean next month, but she didn't correct herself. The kitchen clock ticked behind me. Loud and away clocks only get when your heart is racing. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee mug, watched it curl and disappear, and waited for her to laugh. To say she was joking, to tell me she meant they'd set a date. Instead, she said my name softly, like she was talking to a child who'd just been told bad news. And in that moment, I realized my son had stepped into a new life without ever looking back to see if I was standing there, before all of this. My life moved at a pace I'd grown used to quiet mornings, the hum of routine, small comforts that didn't ask much of me. I lived in the same house I'd raised my son in, the one with the loose stair that creaked if you stepped too close to the wall. The smell of lemon cleaner still clung to the countertops every Sunday afternoon, because old habits don't retire when you do. My son, Daniel, was my only child. I'd raised him mostly on my own after his father passed, and we'd grown into each other in that way. Single parents and their children do too close sometimes, if I'm being honest. We talked every few days. He stopped by at least once a week. Sometimes just to eat, sometimes to sit on the back porch and complain about work while I pretended not to notice how tired he looked. When he started dating her, Emily, I told myself not to read too much into the sudden changes. He smiled more for one. He checked his phone constantly for another. He stopped lingering on Sundays. Started leaving early with apologies that sounded rehearsed. Emily was polite. That was the word everyone used, polite. She shook my hand the first time we met, smiled with her lips, but not quite with her eyes. She brought store-bought cookies the second time she came over, still in the plastic container, receipt folded neatly underneath. I tried to like her. I really did. I asked her questions about her work, her family, where she grew up. She answered carefully, as if every word had been measured before it left her mouth. Nothing warm enough to hold on to. Nothing sharp enough to push against, just careful. Daniel told me they were serious about 3 months in. He said it over the phone like he was delivering a weather update. I remember standing in the hallway, staring at a framed photo of him at 8 years old, missing his front teeth, holding a fish he'd caught himself. "That's wonderful," I said. And I meant it. Or at least I wanted to. After that, wedding talk came in pieces. Not plans, just hints. Emily liked simple things. They didn't want anything big. They were thinking someday. I told myself that meant I'd be involved eventually, that I'd get a call, that I'd be asked my opinion on flowers or venues or dates. Instead, weeks passed. Then months. The first real flicker of unease came on a Tuesday afternoon when Daniel canceled dinner for the third time in a row. His voice sounded strained, like he was trying to hold something together with one hand. "We've just got a lot going on," he said. "I'll make it up to you." I told him not to worry. Hung up the phone. Stood there longer than necessary, listening to the silence settle back into the house. After that, I noticed little things. Emily stopped coming over entirely. Daniel stopped mentioning her name unless I asked. When I did ask, his answers were shorter, less detailed. Like someone skimming stones across water instead of letting them sink. Once, I asked casually. I thought if they'd set a wedding date. There was a pause. Just a breath too long. "Not yet," he said. "We're still figuring things out." I wanted to believe him. I told myself young people did things differently now, that not everything needed to be shared right away, that love wasn't a performance meant for parents. Still, Something sat heavy in my chest after that call, like a door had closed somewhere and I hadn't heard it latched off the day I found out. I hadn't even meant to ask. I was standing by the window, watching the mail truck pull away when Daniel called. His voice sounded too bright, like he'd already rehearsed what he was going to say and was relieved to finally get it out. "Mom," he said, "Emily wanted me to tell you something." My heart gave a small, foolish leap. I smiled before I could stop myself. "Oh?" I said, "What's that?" He hesitated, then handed the phone to her Dot, and that's when she said it. "We got married yesterday." I asked when the wedding was, and she told me it had already happened, just like that. No invitation. No warning. No place for me to stand except outside the moment, looking in. The clock kept ticking. My coffee went cold. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet understanding began to form. This wasn't just about a wedding. I'd missed Dot. It was about something far more painful. It was about being erased. Asterisk, I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. My mouth felt full of cotton, my thoughts moving too slowly to catch up with what I just heard. On the other end of the line, Emily waited. I could hear her breathing steady, controlled. She'd prepared for this moment. "I hadn't yesterday," I finally said. The word came out thin, almost polite. "As in Monday?" "Yes," she replied. "Just a small ceremony. Very simple." Daniel took the phone back then, like he was rescuing her from something uncomfortable. "We didn't want a big thing," he said quickly. "No fuss. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. Not really. I knew what weddings were supposed to be. I'd stood in my own once, years ago, my hands shaking as I held a bouquet that smelled too sweet, my mother crying quietly in the front row. I'd imagined, without even realizing it, that one day I'd sit somewhere similar, watching my son make promises I'd helped shape. Instead, I was standing in my kitchen, barefoot, with cold coffee and a ringing in my ears. "That's nice," I said. The lie tasted bitter. "Congratulations." They thanked me together, their voices overlapping in that way couples do when they're already practiced at being a unit. Then Daniel said they had another call coming in. He promised we'd talk soon. He said he loved me. Asterisk, when the wine went dead, I stayed exactly where I was. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the sun to shift across the floor. Long enough for the house to feel unfamiliar, like I was visiting someone else's life. Later that evening, I reheated leftovers I couldn't taste and sat at the table alone. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, searching for something I'd missed. A sign, a reason that made it make sense. I told myself they'd meant no harm, that they were young, that maybe Emily came from a family where weddings weren't a big deal, that Daniel thought he was protecting me from stress or expectations or disappointment, but there was a difference between protecting someone and excluding them. The next few days passed in a fog. Friends called about mundane things. The grocery clerk asked if I wanted paper or plastic. Life kept going, indifferent to the small earthquake that had cracked something open inside me. It wasn't until Sunday that the real questions began to surface. Daniel came by in the afternoon. He knocked like a guest. When I opened the door, he leaned in to hug me, and for the first time in his life, I hesitated before hugging him back. Asterisk, they wore matching wedding bands. Simple gold. I noticed them immediately, felt a strange pull in my chest. We sat at the table. I poured coffee. My hands shook just enough that I had to steady the pot with both hands. "So," I said, after a long silence, "tell me about it." Emily smiled. She talked about the courthouse, the judge, the two friends who'd signed as witnesses. She said it was perfect, intimate, exactly what they wanted. I nodded where I was supposed to. Asked the questions that came easily. When? Where? Did it rain? Inside, something darker was starting to form. Why didn't you tell me? I asked eventually. I kept my voice calm, almost gentle, but the room went still. Daniel looked at Emily. Emily looked at the table. We didn't think it was necessary, she said. We wanted it to be just about us. The words settled between us, heavy and final. Not necessary, I repeated quietly. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, please don't make this a thing. That was when I realized this had already been a thing. For a long time, just not one I'd been allowed into. After they left, I walked through the house, touching things as if to reassure myself they were still real. The couch arm where Daniel used to sprawl. The door frame where I'd marked his height in pencil, year after year. That night, I couldn't sleep. Questions lined up in my mind like unsent letters. Had there been other decisions made without me? Other conversations I wasn't part of? Had Emily encouraged this distance, or had Daniel chosen it himself? The first clue that something deeper was going on came 2 weeks later. In the form of a folded piece of paper tucked into a magazine Daniel had left behind. It was a legal document. Not a will. Not a bill. A change of address confirmation. My address was nowhere on it. I sat there, magazine open on my lap, heart pounding. They hadn't just gotten married quietly. They'd planned a life that didn't include me in any meaningful way, and they'd done it carefully, deliberately. I thought back over the months. The canceled dinners, the vague answers, the way Emily had always kept her distance. Polite but firm. This hadn't been sudden. It had been intentional. And for the first time since the phone call, I felt something other than hurt. I felt afraid of what else I didn't know. Afraid of how far this silence stretched. Afraid that if I didn't ask the right questions now, I might never get another chance. So I did something I'd never done before. Went looking for the truth. Asterisk, I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not at first. I folded the paper back into the magazine, slid it onto the coffee table, and sat there staring at the wall until the light outside faded into evening. I needed time to think not just about what I'd seen, but about what it meant. It wasn't the address change itself that frightened me. People move. People start new lives. It was the quietness of it all. The careful way everything had been done without a single word to me. I started replaying conversations in my head, hearing them differently now. Emily's measured tone, Daniel's evasiveness, the way decisions had been framed as already settled facts instead of shared moments. The next morning, I woke up early and made tea instead of coffee. My hands were steadier that way. I sat by the window and watched a woman walk her dog past my house, the leash taut, both of them moving in practice rhythm. I wondered when Daniel and Emily had started walking that way together, pulling forward while I struggled to keep up. I decided to call my sister, Margaret. She was the only one who'd always spoken to me plainly, even when the truth hurt. I told her everything. The wedding, the paper, the silence. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she let out a long breath. "Oh," she said softly. "It's not nothing." "No," I replied. "It's not. Have you asked him directly?" She asked, "Not yet." There was a pause. Then gently, "You might not like what you hear." I already knew that. But I also knew that pretending not to notice was no longer an option. That afternoon, I called Daniel. I asked if we could talk, just the two of us. He hesitated, then agreed to stop by the next evening. I spent the day preparing, though I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for. I cleaned the house more thoroughly than usual. Cooked his favorite meal, the one with too much garlic and a sauce that simmered low and slow. I wanted him to remember who I was to him. When he arrived, he looked tired, older somehow. Married life had settled on his shoulders faster than I'd expected. We ate in near silence. The clink of forks against plates sounded too loud. Finally, I reached into the magazine and pulled out the folded paper. I placed it on the table between us. "What's this?" I asked. He didn't touch it. His eyes flicked over it, then away. "It's nothing," he said. "It's not nothing to me," I replied. My voice surprised me, steady, firm. "Why didn't you tell me you were moving?" He rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Because I didn't want to deal with this," he said. With the questions, the disappointment, I felt something crack then, not shatter, but split. "Daniel," I said quietly, "you don't get to decide how I feel by cutting me out." He sighed, long and heavy. "Emily thinks we need boundaries." The word landed hard. Boundaries from what? I asked. From interference, from expectations, from you always being involved. I sat back in my chair. The room felt suddenly smaller. "I raised you," I said. "I supported you. I loved you. And now that's interference?" He shook his head. "That's not what I meant." But it was what he'd allowed. He finally picked up the paper, folded it again, and tucked it into his pocket like it didn't matter. "We're starting our own family now," he said. "We need space." Space. Another careful word. I nodded slowly. "I see." What I didn't say was how much that space felt like exile. After he left, I cried for the first time since the wedding call. Not loudly. Just quiet tears that slipped down my face while I stood at the sink, staring at my reflection in the dark window. But grief has a way of sharpening your senses, of turning confusion into clarity. Over the next few weeks, I paid attention. I noticed how Emily spoke for Daniel when we were all together, how plans were announced, never discussed, how I was informed after decisions were already made. I also noticed something else. They were telling people a story about me. I heard it by accident at a neighbor's barbecue. Someone mentioned how Daniel had finally set boundaries and how it was healthy for young couples. I smiled politely, excused myself early. That was when I realized the public version of this story had already been written and I was the villain. I went home and sat at my desk, staring at an old photo of Daniel and me at the beach, sunburned and smiling. I thought about all the times I'd stepped back when he asked, all the times I'd let go, and I understood something important. This wasn't about control. It was about respect. And if I didn't claim my place in this story now, I might lose it forever. So I decided to speak, not loudly, not angrily, but clearly. Asterisk, I didn't call Daniel right away. I knew myself well enough to know that timing mattered. Words spoken in the wrong moment could do more harm than silence ever did. So I waited. I let the dust settle. I let my heart stop racing every time my phone buzzed. In the meantime, I did something that felt both painful and necessary. I told the truth to the people who mattered, not as a complaint, not as an accusation, just the truth. When friends asked about the wedding, I smiled and said, they chose to do it privately. I wasn't told until afterward. I watched faces change, eyebrows lift, pauses stretch. No drama, no embellishment, just facts. It was remarkable how quickly the air shifted when I stopped carrying the weight alone. A week later, Daniel called. His voice was tight. People are asking questions, he said. I imagine they are. I replied. Emily's upset, he continued. She feels judged. I took a slow breath. I haven't judged anyone, but you're telling people. I'm answering honestly when they ask, I said. I won't lie to protect someone else's comfort. There was silence on the line. I could almost hear the calculation happening on his end. That wasn't the plan. He finally said. Something in his tone surprised, almost wounded, made my chest ache. I don't recall being included in the planning. I said gently, asterisk. He didn't respond to that. We agreed to meet the following Sunday at my house. Emily would be there too. Daniel said they wanted to clear the air. I cleaned again, out of habit more than hope. The house smelled of baked bread and lemon oil. I set the table carefully, choosing the good plates not to impress, but to remind myself of my own worth. They arrived together, holding hands. Emily's grip tightened when she saw the table set for 3. We sat. No one spoke at first. Asterisk. Finally, Emily cleared her throat. I feel like you're trying to make us look bad, she said. I looked at her, then really looked. She wasn't cruel. She was afraid. Afraid of losing control of a narrative she'd carefully constructed. I'm not trying to make anyone look like anything, I said. I'm just not pretending. Daniel shifted in his chair. Mom, you have to understand we needed to do this our way. I understand wanting your own way, I replied. What I don't understand is why your way required my exclusion. Emily's jaw tightened. Because you have opinions. I nodded. I do, everyone does. You're very involved, she added. It can feel overwhelming. I thought of all the times I'd waited to be invited. All the times I'd held my tongue. I stepped back when asked. I said, but stepping back isn't the same as disappearing. The room felt heavy with unsaid things. Daniel finally spoke. We didn't want to hurt you. And yet, I said softly, here we are. No one argued with that. We talked for over an hour. About boundaries, about assumptions, about how love can look different depending on where you stand. I told them how it felt to be left out of one of the most important days of my son's life, not angrily. Just honestly. Emily cried. Quiet tears she wiped away quickly, like she didn't want to be seen as weak. I didn't think it mattered that much, she said. That, I replied, is the difference between us. By the time they left, nothing was magically fixed. But something had shifted. The truth was out in the open now, where it could be seen and felt. Over the next month, the consequences unfolded quietly. Family members started reaching out, not to scold, but to ask. To understand, to fill in gaps. Emily noticed the change. The way conversations paused when she entered. The way people listened more closely when I spoke. It wasn't revenge. It was gravity. Stories once released have a way of settling where they belong. Daniel came by alone one evening weeks later. He sat across from me, hands folded, eyes tired. I didn't realize how much this would hurt you, he said. I nodded. I know. I should have told you, he added. I should have included you. Yes, I said simply. We sat in silence after that. Not uncomfortable, just honest. I didn't know what our relationship would look like moving forward. I only knew it would have to be built on something sturdier than silence. That night, after he left, I sat on the back porch and watched the sun sink behind the trees. The air smelled like cut grass and evening rain. I felt older, wiser, and strangely lighter. Because sometimes reclaiming your place doesn't require shouting. It just requires standing still and letting the truth speak for you. Asterisk. After that evening, something subtle but unmistakable changed in the way Daniel moved around me. He listened more. He didn't mush the silences. When he spoke, he chose his words like they mattered, like they might leave a mark. Emily, on the other hand, became distant. She stopped calling altogether. When we were in the same room, her politeness grew sharper, more formal, like a door that had been carefully closed, but not locked. I could feel her watching me, measuring what I said and how I said it, as if I were something unpredictable she needed to stay prepared for. I didn't chase her. I'd learned by then that chasing only confirmed the very narrative she seemed to fear, that I was intrusive, demanding, unwilling to let go. So I lived my life. I gardened. I went to church on Sundays and sat in the same pew I always had. I made soup for neighbors who were sick and attended a baby shower where no one quite knew how to introduce me anymore. Daniel's mom, spoken softly with a pause afterward. That pause used to sting. Now, I let it sit. The next turning point came unexpectedly, as most real ones do. It was Daniel's birthday. I baked his cake, the same chocolate one I'd made every year since he was 10. I didn't ask if they had plans. I didn't assume I was included. I simply texted, "I made your cake. It's here if you want it." An hour later, he showed up alone. He looked at the cake like it was a memory he hadn't realized he missed. "She didn't want to come?" I asked gently. He shook his head. She said she was tired. He stayed longer than he meant to. We talked about work, about nothing important, about everything that was . At one point, he said, "Emily feels like everyone took your side." I didn't respond right away. I sliced the cake, placed it carefully on a plate, and handed it to him. "There are no sides," I said finally. "There's just truth and how people respond to it." He frowned. "She thinks you planned it." "Planned what?" "People finding out." "The reactions." I almost laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "I didn't plan anything," I said. I stopped hiding. That seemed to land somewhere deep. He stared down at his plate, then back up at me. "I think she was afraid," he said quietly. "Afraid you'd always come first." The words settled over me like dust. "I never asked to come first," I said. "I only asked not to be erased." That night, after he left, I thought about fear, how it makes people draw lines that don't need to exist. How it convinces them love is a limited resource, instead of something that stretches when handled with care. The real public consequence came a month later at a family gathering. Emily's parents were there. Distant, polite people I'd only met a handful of times. Conversation drifted, as it always does toward weddings. Someone mentioned how sudden Daniel and Emily's had been. Emily's mother laughed awkwardly. "Yes, well, they wanted it small and private," someone added. Even his mother didn't know. The room went quiet. Emily froze. Daniel looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Later that evening, Emily approached me near the kitchen sink. Her voice was tight, controlled. "You didn't correct them," she said. "There was nothing to correct," I replied calmly. She swallowed. "Do you enjoy this?" I turned to face her fully then. "No," I said, "but I accept it." Her eyes searched my face, maybe looking for triumph. There was none. "What do you want from me?" she asked, frustration cracking through. I thought about that. Carefully. "I want honesty," I said, "and respect, not deference, not control. Just space where I'm allowed to exist." She nodded once. No apology. But something in her expression shifted from defensiveness to something closer to understanding. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Relationships don't reset just because the truth has been spoken. They reassemble slowly, piece by piece, sometimes with gaps that never fully close. But Daniel began calling more often, stopping by without announcing it, like a formal visit. Asking my opinion again, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Emily remained cautious. But she no longer tried to shrink me out of the room, and I learned something important during that time. Being a mother doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. Loving your child doesn't mean accepting erasure. I hadn't lost my son. I'd simply reached the part of motherhood no one warns you about, the part where you have to redefine your place. Not by force, but by self-respect. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sky fade to purple, Daniel called. "Mom," he said, "I'm glad you spoke up." I closed my eyes. "So am I said, because silence might keep the peace, but it also keeps the pain. And sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is let her truth be seen. Asterisk, the quiet that followed Daniel's words wasn't heavy. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a long storm. When the air feels washed clean and every sound seems sharper because you're no longer bracing for thunder, I'm glad too. I told him, and I meant it in a way that surprised me. After that call, I slept better than I had in months. Not perfectly old habits of worry don't disappear overnight, but deeply enough to dream again. And one dream, Daniel was small, maybe 5 or 6, running toward me with his shoes untied, laughing like nothing in the world could hurt him. I woke up with tears in my eyes, but they weren't bitter ones. They felt like release. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. It came the first time Emily texted me directly instead of through Daniel. Just a simple message. I made too much soup. Would you like some? No apology, no explanation. But an opening. I said yes. Asterisk. She dropped it off in a glass container, still warm. We stood awkwardly at the door for a moment. Two women who hadn't quite learned how to stand in the same space yet. Thank you, I said. You're welcome, she replied. And then, almost as an afterthought, it's chicken and rice, I smiled. My favorite. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. Asterisk, another step came when Daniel invited me to dinner at their place. The first time I'd been inside their home, it smelled like new paint and something sweet baking in the oven. Their furniture was mismatched, clearly still figuring itself out. It felt human. Emily hovered in the kitchen while Daniel talked. Too much, like he was trying to fill every silence before it could turn dangerous. I didn't rush her. I didn't comment on things that weren't mine to comment on. I asked about her work. I listened. At one point, she handed me a plate and our fingers brushed. She flinched, then laughed nervously. Sorry, she said. It's okay, I replied. And it was. Later that evening, as I was putting on my coat, she surprised me. I didn't think about how it would feel for you, she said quietly, eyes on the floor. About the wedding. I waited. Didn't rush to fill the space. I was afraid, she continued. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of not being enough. I recognized that fear. It was an old one. I carried my own version of it for years. I never wanted to take anything from you, I said gently. I just wanted to be seen. She nodded. I see that now. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the beginning of understanding. And sometimes that's even harder to reach. As the months passed, the sharp edges dulled. Family gatherings grew less tense. My name was spoken more freely again, without that careful pause. I learned when to step back and when not to disappear. Daniel changed too. He stopped acting like love was something he had to ration. He realized, I think, that honoring his wife didn't require diminishing his mother. One afternoon, he came by with a photo album. I found these at the house, he said. Thought you might want them. We sat together on the couch, turning pages. Birthday candles, school plays, a graduation cap that never quite sat straight. I didn't realize how much I missed this. He admitted. I reached over and squeezed his hand. It's okay to miss things. He nodded, eyes glassy. Time has a way of softening stories once they're fully told. The wedding I hadn't attended became less of a wound, and more of a marker, a line between who I had been and who I chose to become. I stopped, waiting for permission to exist in my son's life. I also stopped needing his choices to validate my worth. That was the real healing. One evening, months later, I stood in my kitchen again, coffee mug warm in my hands. The same clock ticked on the wall. The same window looked out onto the street, but I was different. I had learned that dignity isn't loud. It doesn't demand an audience. It simply refuses to shrink. I had learned that love doesn't mean unlimited access, but it does require honesty, and I had learned that sometimes the most painful exclusions teach us exactly where we stand and how to stand there with grace. when Daniel and Emily eventually talked about having a larger celebration, something casual, a gathering rather than a wedding, I told them I'd be happy to come or happy to stay home. Either way, I was at peace. That peace was mine. I hadn't borrowed it from anyone. And that made all the difference. Asterisk life didn't snap back into place after that. It eased, slowly, like a joint that's been stiff too long and needs patience. Before it can move freely again, Daniel didn't suddenly become the son he'd been before, and I didn't expect him to. That version of us belonged to another chapter. But he did something quieter and somehow more meaningful. He began including me again. Not out of obligation, out of intention. He'd call on his drive home from work, sometimes just 5 minutes, sometimes longer. He'd ask what I was cooking. He'd tell me what he and Emily were arguing about, small things, like groceries or whose turn it was to call the plumber. Ordinary things, marriage things. I listened more than I spoke. Emily remained careful. She was cordial, thoughtful even, but still guarded. I understood that too. Trust doesn't rebuild itself just because the storm has passed. It needs repetition, consistency, time without incident. The real test came the following spring. Daniel called one afternoon and said, "We're thinking about hosting Easter this year." The words landed softly, but I felt them all the same. "That's nice." I said, "We wanted to know if you'd come early," he continued. "Help set up, maybe." "Only if you want." There it was. The difference between being informed and being invited. "I'd like that," I replied. On Easter morning, I arrived with a basket of rolls still warm from the oven. Emily opened the door. She stepped aside without hesitation and let me in. The house buzzed with activity. Her parents were already there, her mother arranging flowers too carefully, her father watching sports quietly from the couch. Daniel was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, laughing at something that had gone wrong with the ham. No one looked surprised to see me. That mattered more than anyone knew. Emily and I worked side by side for most of the morning. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about recipes, about how quickly time seemed to be moving, about nothing that required defense. At one point, she handed me a dish and said, "You can put this wherever you think it fits." It was a small thing, but I felt it later as everyone sat down to eat. Daniel raised his glass, not formally, not dramatically. "I just want to say," he began, "I'm glad we're all here." His eyes met mine for a brief moment before moving on. I nodded once. That was enough. After Easter, something else shifted. Emily stopped bristling when I spoke. She stopped correcting Daniel mid-sentence when he referenced a memory that included me. She even asked my opinion once about paint colors, of all things. "Blue feels calm," I said, "but only if the light's right." She smiled. "That's what I was thinking." We weren't close. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way movies like to promise. But we were no longer adversaries in a silent war neither of us had officially declared. One afternoon, months later, Emily came over alone. She stood in my doorway holding a folder. "I found these while organizing," she said. "They're wedding photos." My chest tightened. "I thought you might want copies," she added quickly. If that's okay." I invited her in. We sat at the table and opened the folder together. There they were. Daniel in a suit that didn't quite fit right yet. Emily in a simple dress, smiling nervously. 2 witnesses standing a little too far away. I studied the photos quietly. "I didn't know if giving these to you would feel like rubbing it in," she said. "It doesn't," I replied honestly. "It helps." She looked relieved. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. The words rushed out before she could stop them. "Not just for the wedding, for how I handled everything." I met her eyes. "I believe you," I said. That didn't erase the past. But it loosened its grip. As the year went on, I learned to live comfortably in my new place, Not center stage, not backstage. Just present. I learned when to offer advice and when to let silence do the work. I learned that my worth didn't depend on proximity or permission, and I learned something else. Two dots sometimes, the people we love don't realize they're hurting us, not because they don't care, but because fear speaks louder than empathy until someone finally names it. Naming it had cost me comfort, but it had given me clarity. One evening, Daniel and Emily invited me over for dinner again. As I was leaving, Emily hugged me, not stiffly, not out of obligation. Just a brief, natural hug. "Drive safe," she said. I smiled. "I will." Driving home, I passed the old park where Daniel used to play when he was small. The swings were empty. The sun was low. I didn't feel sad. I felt complete, because being a mother doesn't end. When your child marries, it changes, and learning how to stand in that change with dignity, with honesty, with your spine intact, may be the hardest lesson of all, but it's one worth learning.